Hello and welcome to Variety's Slice of Life, an otaku media podcast. As always, I am Anthony, and joining me today is the lovely Zach.
Hello.
And Jarrett.
Salutations, Internet.
We are a bi-monthly podcast talking about games, anime, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Today we are going to be talking about boss fights. Boss fights are a staple of any video game. They come in many flavors, many varieties. And yeah, we're going to be talking about some of our favorites. What would you consider, like... So definitively a boss fight, you would say it would be somebody that has a health bar that is bigger than, like, everything else that you've fought before, right?
But like health bar size or just normal to like actual size?
I mean, probably health bar size, because there's a good chunk of bosses that are about average size.
Yeah, that was my thought. I mean, like if we go off just like straight mechanics, yeah, usually like if it has a noticeably larger health bar than anything you've had to fight before, because like there's definitely like tropes for bosses. It's not always 100%, but they follow us. Like they're like if there's a list of tropes, a lot of them ticks a lot of the same boxes. Not all of them, but it's the normal go-tos.
I feel like the only exception is the occasional game where it's only boss battles.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that does kind of like, I guess, sideswipe the trope of like, hey, this thing is supposed to be insanely more difficult to beat compared to everything else, but it's just, that's all that you have to beat. I guess like a perfect example of that would be the Shadow of the Colossus. Where it's just all boss fights that just continuously get harder. Which, Shadow of the Colossus, great game. If you don't know about it, what the hell is wrong with you?
Still, I want to play that. I never actually played that.
It's, I played it when I was younger. It is amazing for a PS2 game. Like, hands down. And it makes me sad learning about how, it was like nerfed pretty heavily, because originally he wanted 48 bosses, and then they worked it down to 24, and then they worked it down again to 16. And they had concepts for all these bosses, and they were all really good looking. And like he had one where you were supposed to fight a phoenix and crash it into a lake so you could kill it.
What about that dam, though? What does it mean?
The elusive dam. There was supposed to be a boss fight against something there. I don't remember what it was, though. There's a YouTube channel, which I'll probably end up linking in the description. He's called, like, Nomad Soul. All he does is just dissect Shadow of the Colossus footage. And I think it was so... he was so relevant that I think that they used his reference footage when they remade the game. Like, he did such a good job, and he has credits in the remake of the game, so that's kind of cool.
I can't believe that slipped my mind when I mentioned boss fight games. I mean, obviously, because I've never played it, but yeah, like that is the quintessential only boss battles video game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for a PS2 game, the graphics are probably the most impressive. Like, they push the PS2 to its limits and then some. It's really cool.
Yeah, like from what I've seen of the game, it does like, again, it's very good at making like the. I mean, for a game that's only boss battles, it's really it has a lot of the things I like in boss battles, like kind of, you know, epic kind of set pieces, climatic things where like epic music's playing as you're holding on for dear life, and then even other things like humanizing them, as a lot of the colossi tend to actually express emotions in some way. Some are just don't fight back and are really sad. Some are afraid of fire, which is a fun thing.
Yeah, like the game itself is very I mean, it's a very artistic game to begin with, and it's just the way that they handle all the boss fights is so elegant, and they make you feel bad for killing the bosses, which is something that next to no game ever really does. I love that. Oddly enough, so Castlevania has like a handful of 3D games, and for some reason they ripped off one of the Shadow of the Colossus boss fights, and it's just so badly done.
Yeah.
But that. And it sucks because it like you think like, oh cool, this is going to be an homage, and then you realize no, this is just a blatant rip-off. It's handled poorly and the mechanics aren't fun. So it's like
Yeah, like I feel like giant monster that you have to climb is like the greatest idea on paper, but you have to like have your systems fit it. Like Shadow of the Colossus literally created its systems for that concept. They have a stamina meter and a grip button. Like obviously you can tell like that's what they wanted and that's what they did.
Oh yeah, and then like they even get creative with it, like because you have to stab pressure points in like the monsters to do any kind of damage to them. And they get creative where like one of the pressure points is on the monster's hand, so you actually have to climb down his arm onto his hand, and then he starts like swinging it around. Like they get really creative with it, and it's really cool, which I really appreciate. And then it brings up the questions like, so boss fight music is usually the most like quintessential part of a boss fight that a lot of people remember. You're like, oh yeah, that boss fight had such good music, you know. And Shadow of the Colossus, it has good music, but the problem is every single, aside from the very last fight, all of the music is the same. It's you have the intense music, which is great, and then you have like the post-climax of killing the monster, and then you have the being warped back to the hub. But like, then you have a game kind of like Lollipop Chainsaw, where all the boss fights have completely different music styles, completely different songs, and they're all, I mean, their levels are kind of built around the boss. Which that I guess that's another trope. How do you feel about levels that are built around bosses?
I like it. It definitely like gets you kind of like in that mindset of like this is what the boss is about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've been playing. I haven't finished it yet, but I've been playing a lot of No Straight Roads, and like that's what that game is all about. Is it's like you go through a level, you start a level that's based on the boss, kind of like their theme. Like the second boss you fight is a Vocaloid mermaid, so it's like an underwater. It's like a kind of under the sea looking location, like coral everywhere and all that. So like the stage is like obviously very much based on the boss.
Does she sing during the boss fights?
Yeah, every boss has like their own like kind of musical style. Where like the first boss is like a DJ, second boss Vocaloid mermaid. She actually sings the song herself.
That's
third boss a pianist, so she plays. So like the song is very piano focused. Fourth boss is a boy band, so they got a whole like boy band kind of like EDM boy band kind of thing going on.
And so like, I mean, I love when bosses sing during like River City Girls has that with Boss Noise, where like she sings at a concert and then like you have to dodge her like Guitar Hero-esque attacks, and then she comes back kicking your ass while the instrumentals play. I love that kind of stuff. It's so good. It's so almost cheesy, but I love it.
Oh, yeah, that's what I love about that mermaid boss in No Straight Roads is my favorite, just because she like the song is just so like inconsequential to what's actually going on. Like it's not like a Philistine where it's like she's like singing about the characters. She's just singing like a song that makes sense. Like it would really come from her, and it's just like her saying like really dumb things like 1, 2, 3, 4 fishes swimming on the ocean floor. Like it's just like really silly things like that.
It's funny that you mentioned Margaret Moonlight, because that's a very good foil to that, where it's like it's a terrible level lead up that has nothing to do with that boss, and then the song that the boss sings during that fight is a very predominant like story relevant song.
So now I have a question, because another thing with boss fights, typically is they have some kind of mechanic or something that's different with them, usually. And I know of one game that kind of fits into like all three of the things that we were just talking about, and it's actually Mega Man. Pretty much because all the Mega Man games have fairly decent music. They have a level that's entirely built around each robot master that you're going against. And then, that boss has a certain mechanic that you then get later. But how do you guys feel about the level introducing you to a mechanic that the boss is going to use later on? Like, you don't know it at first, but then, like, later the boss is doing some of the mechanics that some of the things that you were fighting earlier were doing.
I mean,
Do you like that? Do you not like that?
I just think that's good game design if you can introduce a concept in a contained environment, because I think what Mega Man does best is they introduce you to this new thing in a contained environment where it can't kill you as long as you're like trying. Then they ramp it up in difficulty a bit more, and then after that, you're presented with like either the boss fight or the concept in its full force. And I really like that, but I do feel like that does not work for every game. Like, I feel like for Mega Man it works really well.
Yeah, I have for Mega Man it works really well, but there is a game that I know I'm in Batman Arkham City, or pretty much in all the Arkham games. This one gets brought up. The first time you fight Bane is, I think, a very weird and then very stupid fight, because it's one of those, because they decided to make Bane just the big dumb monster again, at least for the Arkham games.
Yeah.
He was Luchador Arkham.
Was he Luchador in Arkham? Well, the thing I remember is that he would just do the charge, hit a wall, you come back, punch, and then you repeat the process again. That's normally okay, fine. He's an early game boss, if I remember correctly. But then they just keep using that same mechanic for mundane guys later in the game. Pretty much after that fight, you just start fighting guys who just will charge you. Oh, you dodge, hit wall, punch, down.
I mean that's just like a weird thing that ends up happening to a lot of bosses, where they're a early game boss, but then they just become a standard enemy at some point.
Yeah, I've seen that in games, and I always find that a bit weird. Like, I guess it kind of like shows the progression of the character a bit, where like the first boss is now just like the Goomba.
And I don't know how I feel about that, because it brings up like, okay, yeah, you've gotten stronger, but if games don't do it right, like, this is going to be a fucking curveball, but the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe GameCube game does that.
Oh, alright. Yeah, you said curveball, but dude, that's like way out there.
Yeah. Right. There's a troll that you fight in the very beginning, and then the troll just becomes a standard enemy later on. But you have to beat it in the same way. The only difference is that it has less health. And it's I don't know, it's weird.
Yeah, like, I bring up Arkham because like that's the best. It's the best case that I have. That it is like, all right, you fight this boss. This boss has a mechanic. That mechanic then follows you for the rest of the game. Just now with mooks. I don't know. For me, at least in that game, I don't like it. Just because I think it makes that boss that you fought earlier a little bit too trivial. Especially with just how they handled Bane, and it, like, that was his only mechanic, which is running at you. Running at you, oh, you sidestep, he hit wall, you grab him with grappling hook, you punch.
I also... So this kind of brings up the thing, it's like, in progression in a story, your character should learn things, and boss fights should be the test of the thing that they've learned.
Yeah.
And so that the final boss should have these, not all of these mechanics, but they should have some mechanics that mirror certain fights or mirror certain parts of the game prior to that. But I like, Lollipop Chainsaw completely throws that out the window, and it's so weird. So Lollipop Chainsaw has 6 bosses, and you see 5 of them like out the gate, like they're introduced very early on, and they're all so like super cool. They have their own unique style of music and look, and like their fight is very unique. And then after you beat them all, they summon this giant zombie Elvis Presley. And his fight has nothing to do with anything else in the game. And it's its own complete original thing. And it is the least memorable fight out of the entire game.
Oh, man, that thing you just mentioned makes me think of one of my favorite boss battles. And I'm sad that no one ever talks about this specific boss battle, because it's not only my favorite boss battle in the game, but also just one of my favorite boss battles in general, is Zant from Twilight Princess.
Oh yeah, I'd have to agree with that. It's really good.
I was like, I don't like, Ganondorf isn't even memorable in that game, but Zant certainly is. Zant's like a crazy, scary bad guy. Like Ganondorf Ganondorf's like there just because he needs to be, but Zant just steals the show.
Like, I think anything I ever heard from Twilight Princess, because that was around the time I wasn't playing a lot of games, so like I kind of skipped over Twilight Princess. But the only thing I do remember hearing people talk about was how just Zant kind of got shafted by Ganondorf out of just nowhere. It's like, oh yes, we've been dealing with that incredibly awesome bad guy, and it's like, oh hey Ganondorf. I guess you're here now.
I mean, I hate when they do that, where like the final boss is not relevant throughout the entire game, and the guy that was relevant isn't, like, he's dealt with so easily or just off screen.
Yeah, because Zant is like the penultimate kind of boss battle. Like, you fight Zant on your way to Hyrule Castle for the final dungeon, and Zant's boss battle is so good. Because at first it's just like a sword fight. You're just fighting him like a normal guy. He's doing his like weird attacks. He's just really weird. And then he teleports you to the first dungeon, and he starts mimicking the first dungeon boss's attacks. And you have to hit him like how you hit the first boss. And then he warps you to the second dungeon, and you do it again.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's
interesting.
I mean, is that a long boss fight?
It's not particularly long. Like, you go through like every dungeon, and like you have to hit them like how you would hit that dungeon's respective boss. And I think they actually like even do like some cool stuff in the music as well.
Interesting. So what about, like, okay, what are your guys' opinions on bosses that you have to fight multiple times, like throughout the series?
Throughout the series, not just stage changes.
Like oh cool, level 1 you fight him, then like level 6 you fight him, and then he's the final boss. I hate it personally. I don't think it's ever done right, because like they don't power them up correctly, and if it's a rival fight, the rival isn't like well pronounced.
The only like that I can agree with you, like that particular setup I don't think works. The only way I see it's like semi-working, and I don't really think it's like that great of working, it's just the getting the absolute crap kicked out of you by the boss in the first like few minutes of the game.
I hate that. I hate that so much. That? I hate like fighting the final boss in the very beginning and losing to him. It's such a cheap like tactic, in my opinion.
Interesting.
Because the latest Marvel vs. Capcom game does that. And it's
well, that's just a bad game.
That's an odd one. That's a fighting game. That's an odd one to start that off with. Like
you fight Ultron Sigma, and you can theoretically beat him. Like, you can do enough damage and dodge his attacks, but after a certain point, his health bar just stops going down.
Yeah, I feel like that. I feel like that's bad. I like ones where I can't really think of it. I feel like I've seen a game do this before, where you're like fighting as like your character's like ancestor or whatever, and then like you lose to them, and then you continue the game as like a new character or whatever.
Oh yeah, I kind of know what you're talking about. I like that. That's a bit different.
Didn't the PS1 Castlevania game do that? I don't actually know what happens with part, because I know you play the beginning part as a completely different character.
Kind of an odd curveball, but like Then there's also like boss fights, which are the sole purpose of the boss fight is to depower the character, like God of War 2. So in God of War 1, you become the God of War, and you are a god at that point. And then in God of War 2, Zeus tricks you into draining all of your powers into a sword to kill a boss. And I don't know how I feel about that, because like the fight itself is really good and it's really well done. It's very God of War has some of the best boss fights, hands down.
I mean, that's not like a boss trope. That's just a video game trope.
Well, like I feel like that's, at least in that regard, I feel like that's just like the sequel issue.
Yeah, it's like that's the Metroid like staple is like get hit, fall into the door, like fall into the wall of an elevator and lose your epic powers.
It's that or Amnesia.
Either that or the general doesn't let you use your powers.
No, established you can't do that. But, sir, the missiles were said that you can't.
But what is it? I wanted to go back to the thing where you fight a character multiple times, because I was trying to think of a specific one, and I thought of one that I really hated was the latest Shantae game, Shantae and the Seven Sirens. Mm-hmm. You fight Risky Boots like so many times, and it's never fun.
I mean, Risky Boots' fights in the previous game, they were all right. They were definitely not the pinnacle of the series, but is it really that bad in the news game?
Yeah. Well, I feel like Risky Boots was the first boss in what was the Half Genie Hero, and she had a really fun fight. In this game, it's just horrid because like the first time you fight her, it's just like a simple like easy boss battle. Like she in Half Genie Hero, she had this giant like pirate ship mech thing. In this game, she's just running back and forth, shooting a gun and dropping the whatever the heck her minions are called. And then you beat her, and she's like, "I'll be back." And then you fight her every time before every boss battle. Like she leads up every boss battle, and like it's just slightly more difficult each time. It's so boring. Like she's not hard. It's just boring and like really badly designed.
And I mean, from how that sounds, like I kind of also don't like bosses that don't have the potential to switch up their movesets upon like games you have to beat multiple times. They either need like Binding of Isaac, how they handle it is there are set like 10 bosses per level, and it's a random selection of which boss you're gonna fight, and then sometimes they can have like a spin on their move. But then you have something like Hades where it's pretty much the same fight every single time, and so it's
until you activate extreme measures, but that one is a voluntary thing. So
yeah, and it's I appreciate when they can add replayability like tenfold to it, where you don't get bored fighting the same person like Risky Boots over and over again.
Yeah, because like Hades gets close to that Isaac thing, but it only relates to the mini bosses.
Yeah, that's like my only problem with Hades is the fact that it's the same bosses every single time. Aside from the Gorgon, I like Meg and her sisters. I think that's cool that it changes them up. I wish that there was a bit more, but I like it still.
I mean, in essence, the Hydra is the same. It's just that they all three Hydras look exactly the same.
That, and I fight all three Hydras the exact same no matter what, so I just keep a distance and poke at them.
But I was trying to think. I feel like the reoccurring boss is good if they can make like a good joke out of it, because going to Shantae again, they do that actually pretty good with Octo Baron, I think is his name, like the big octopus. He appears in every like Shantae game, and like the joke is that he's like just kind of like really, really lame. It's like he shows up and he doesn't really want to fight, like he's just kind of doing his own thing. And then, like, usually some circumstance ends up bringing him to, like, have to fight you.
There's kind of on the flip side of that, where it's someone that you fight multiple times. There's a trope that we'll see in like shows and animes and stuff that I don't think translate greatly to video games, and that's the boss that you don't see until the very, very end.
Yeah.
Like you don't you never like see them, or like you barely hear anything about. I think that works well for anime and stuff, because it builds tension, mystery for who this who is this person. But when it comes down to a boss fight, something like that, not seeing anything of them when they're supposed to be like the final boss, I don't think it comes across the same way. The investment level, I don't think is quite the same in a video game compared to watching a show like that.
I'd kind of agree. I think that there's No More Heroes handles that in an interesting way where you don't know the final boss, but he has a number, and that's your goal, is to get to him. You don't know anything about him, but you do know they exist.
Yeah.
And I feel like No More Heroes does that fairly well, despite them literally offing the boss in one hit, so you could fight somebody else at the end of the game.
Yeah, I was trying so hard to remember. I was like, who is the final boss in No More Heroes 1?
Dark Star.
Yeah, it's a freaking Darth Vader parody who instantly gets killed by a character that's loosely referenced throughout the game.
Yeah. I mean, No More Heroes 2 does it even weirder, where the final the final boss of that game is the heir to a pizza empire, because in the first game you can get side missions to kill these people, and the people that you kill are just his family.
Yeah.
And I'm talking, the side missions have no story relevance whatsoever. And then the third game has something to do with something in the second game. I can't remember, but it's gonna be dumb.
The final boss of No More Heroes 2 is so bad.
Yeah.
It's just a weird kid, and each phase is dumber than the last. The first phase, he has a car desk that he drives around.
In his office.
Second phase, he becomes a buff superhero. Third phase, he legit becomes a parade float. A parade balloon.
It's so stupid. And I would say No More Heroes 2 has probably some of the best boss fights in any game. There are some that are a little janky, but then you have some really good fights in that. But then it's just such a letdown of a final boss.
I mean, yeah, I feel I think overall I like No More Heroes 2's bosses more than the first one, but the final boss is even worse. Obviously Mario Moonlight is great, but I feel an underrated one is always the cosmonaut.
Oh, Vladimir something or other. Yeah, he's so cool, just shooting lasers at you from space.
And he's just please respond. It's just
him. Alice Twilight's also a really good fight in that, because she has the 6 lightsaber, she's got a fucking so that game has a lot of Star Wars references, Jarrett.
Yeah.
And she's kind of a reference to General Grievous, because she has a bunch of arms that have lightsabers on the ends of them.
All right.
I mean, the second game's literally called Travis Strikes Back.
Oh.
Yeah, it's they're not abashed by it. Yeah, that game also has one of the tropes where it's the boss fight is just your character but reskinned. Because you fight your twin brother. Is it your twin brother or just older brother?
Yeah, he's your. Yeah, they are twins. He was just born slightly before, though.
Yeah.
He makes point in pointing that out, that he was born first.
Henry Cooldown.
I love it.
It's so stupid. He's your Irish brother or something. Yeah. There's a lot going on here. And it's just he has a handful of different moves, but aside from that, he's pretty much just you. And it's one of the hardest fights in the game. And it's I don't know how I feel about those kind of fights where you just fight yourself. Bayonetta also has that, where you fight Jean. and she's just.
Yeah, no, you finish.
I was about to say, she's just like a quite literal reskin of Bayonetta. And it's okay because like she has witch time too, so it like fighting her is actually annoying because it's just fighting you.
I mean, I feel like not like a great number of games. I feel like there are definitely games that do that because I know like Kingdom Hearts is very big on that. Like I don't know how many times you end up fighting Shadow You in throughout all those games.
Zelda.
I mean, one of the villains, Ventus, is literally evil Sora.
All right, okay, we're not getting into the plot of Kingdom Hearts right now.
Not yet. It's a future episode.
We don't have 13 and a half hours to get through the first game. The first game's plot.
But I mean, that trope has been around since like the beginning of certain video games. Like Dark Link is a great example of that.
Oh yeah, fighting the Shadow You has always been an interesting thing. It's always I feel like it is always a boss fight, or at least a mini boss fight. It's never just like you're in a normal fight and then all of a sudden, there's a Shadow Me.
And it's weird because that fight's always meaningful in some way because they're either they're always your relative, a super close friend, or like quite literally a mirror you.
Yeah. Or it's some weird emotional lesson with it. Or the villain's just being a dick and be like, haha, fight yourself now.
I feel like Shadow Link is one of the best ones just because he actually has his health total equals your own.
That's a nice touch.
Yeah, like it's not a set thing, it's whatever you have up to that point.
So do you would you like it more if like you were saying with Travis, how it's like basically a 1-for-1, or do you like it when they change it up, like they're almost erratic? Because I've seen some games where they make like the Shadow You like erratic and very hard to figure out what they're gonna do. Like there's some semblance of things that you can do, but then it's almost like its own thing.
I like it when it's like the base moves are the same, but like they have like a handful of things. Like I like what they do with Henry Cooldown, where he has a projectile attack that you don't have, and it's cool because like Henry feels like a more well-rounded character. Like he has distance, he has close attacks, he has a bit of everything. But Travis is all close distance and wrestling moves, and so like I appreciate that aspect, and I wish that like they would kind of do that a bit more, where it's like either their movesets or the way that I can't think of any games off the top of my head, but when they utilize things that your character has in a different way. Like, do you kind of understand what I'm saying? Like, they either have a weapon that they use differently or something.
I know I've seen that, but I can't place the games that I've seen that in before.
Yeah, it's a very niche thing, and I know it exists. I just don't remember what it is.
No, I really like. I like when you're not like fighting a mirror of yourself, but you're fighting more of a sort of a representation of the franchise, where like you're fighting like a guy who has like all of the potential powers that you could have. Like a guy who uses like all of the classes or all of the weapons you could have used in a previous game or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another thing. How do you feel when the boss fight is the character from the previous game?
I mean, Pokemon, like fucking. Straight up go to the top of that mountain, and then like you talk to Red, he says absolutely nothing, and then rocks you with like like a full starter team.
Yeah.
Level 80 Pikachu,
It's gone insane up on that mountain. Dude, what are you doing up here? It's like 3 below. You're on top of a mountain, and you're just in like a light jacket.
That's another thing I love, where it's like thematically this is a crazy cool like location for a fight, but why the fuck are you here?
Oh god, that's a lot of Mega Man levels. Like it's Mega Man 8, I think there's a level where you're just fighting up in the clouds and you're jumping from like hella platform to hella platform to hella platform to fight like Windman or something like that. And I'm just like, this is incredibly dangerous. Like, this is nuts.
This Tengu man, don't knock me on my Mega Man 8 knowledge. Lived that.
Mega Man 8. It's just been forever since I played it.
Live and breathe Mega Man 8.
Oh, I know, I love 8.
I like the Mega Man Street Fighter crossover that they had, where the bosses were the Street Fighter characters, and you just got the power-ups. It was a interesting game, interesting way of doing that.
Sounds like an interesting game.
Yeah, it was a. I mean, it's interesting because it was just on a side note, it was a fan game that essentially, like, got the blessing from Capcom.
Like, hey, this is pretty fucking cool. Do it, keep doing it. So I got to bring up Nier Automata, because Nier Automata handles their boss fights so weirdly. Like, the two bosses, like the main antagonists, are Adam and Eve, and they are the weirdest fucking things ever because they have no relevance to the story whatsoever. I mean, a little bit, but like, for being the final boss, they are the least final boss thing I've ever seen in my life. Because, like, the story is not about them, and they are, like, a gear in the bigger, like, complex of things. Like, they push the story forward and they're relevant, but they are not what is necessary to it. And, like, you fight them once, then you see a cutscene of them, and then you fight one of them later, and then you see another cutscene, and then you have the final fight. And the game is like close to 30-something hours long, and each scene is maybe 5 minutes at most. Yeah, it is. It is such a weird thing, because they were marketed as being like, these are the final bosses that you're going to fight, and then they flip it around and like you have to like you fight yourself and like fight a bunch of 2Bs and like do all this crazy shit, and it's just, the final bosses are just nothing in the grand scheme of things, and it's such a weird way of handling that. But I like how they were presented, and I like the characters themselves, because they seem very interesting, but you see nothing of them like at all, so you're like, oh fuck, I don't know why you're so cool.
I know this is gonna be very weird. What genre do you think typically has the most disappointing bosses?
First-person shooters.
Ooh, I forgot about that one. So I was gonna say fighting games, because like yeah, they can occasionally throw in an interesting mechanic, but I feel like, at the end of the day, it all breaks down to fighter game usual.
Yeah, that, or it's like they just have a lot of health, or a cheap tactic that hits you, like...
With a big guy with, like, impossible to dodge attacks.
Yeah.
But it's fun when they let you play as that, because there's a code in Marvel Capcom 3 that lets you play as Galactus.
I like that. I don't like boss fights that don't... This is a weird thing. The boss fights that are impossible to beat the first time without prior knowledge. Like, Super Meat Boy has a boss that his attacks have a no tell whatsoever, and they're impossible to dodge. And you have to memorize his attack pattern before you fight him, or you have to have like enough trial and error to beat him after that. Like, he has zero tell, and I hate that. Like, it is... I don't think a boss fight should be easy, and I don't think that it's like, if you're good at the game, you should be able to, like, fucking mop the floor with them. But I do think that any cheap attack needs to kind of be presented in a way that you can learn from that experience and not just have it instantly kill you.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I feel like that almost goes without saying, but my only exception to that rule is Psycho Mantis.
Psycho Mantis is a beautiful... I mean, all of the Metal Gear boss fights like that are just, like, so weird. Just, they have, like, hidden mechanics that...
Yeah, it's like, you have to beat Psycho Mantis by plugging your controller into the second port.
Or there's the guy that, like, has control of bees, and if you wear a certain color, the bees don't attack you as much because bees aren't like attracted to that color especially.
There's the sniper from Metal Gear Solid 3 that if you if you turn off the game for a few days, he'll die of old age.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, I genuinely love Metal Gear boss fights for how insane that Kojima was just like, yeah, fuck it, we're gonna make some weird stuff.
That's a fun thing. Like I feel like Metal Gear Solid is just good for like all of like the weird boss like Easter eggs and secret things. I was like, I wish that was a thing that like can be done more. Is just like interesting like secrets to a boss battle, like the big wolf from Dark Souls, where if you wear like that one armor, it becomes like really sad or whatever.
Oh yeah, or there's the final boss in Dark Souls 2. You fight his brother earlier on, and if you put his brother's armor on when you walk into the boss fight, he immediately goes into a second phase, which is significantly harder.
That brings up a question. So, because I know like this is a standard thing for a lot of boss fights, how do you guys feel about multi-staged boss fights? And not like not like we were talking earlier, where like you fight them throughout the game, but like it is the last fight, but it's like you knock out their first health bar, and then just like the entire fight just changes.
I mean, I feel like that's a staple, and I don't really have much of a problem with it.
I like it, but the only time I don't like it is when it is like impossible to know that beforehand.
You just don't like the initial shock of it, like.
Well,
hey, I beat. Oh.
Not necessarily that. I'm saying like if you, let's say you have like consumables or something that you're saving for the final boss.
Yeah.
And then you use it, and then the final boss is like, haha, JK, I have 3 more phases that you have to deal with, but none of the other bosses have had that before. I'd be like,
yeah.
So
it's like I know like the first. I forget the villain that you fight at the end of the first Kingdom Hearts game.
Ansem.
Yeah, Ansem, because he has two or 3 phases.
he has 3, I think.
Because he has like the normal hem, then he turns into the giant heartless thing.
Oh, I thought the giant heartless thing was his 3rd phase.
Was there a second one?
Remember.
It's been a hot minute since I played Kingdom Hearts 1.
That's another thing. How do you feel about bosses? Like, I like when bosses are bigger. I don't know why. Like, I don't like small bosses. They feel weird.
It ultimately, for me, it depends on the situation. Like, if it's like, something like Kingdom Hearts or something that's a fantasy game, it makes sense that, there's probably something that's larger than you like that. But if it's a game where it's just people in them, having a random giant boss, I think just feels out of place. So I think it's entirely situational, whatever the setting is for the game.
I feel like for me, it's situational on what the gameplay pertains to. Like, is the gameplay suited to fight a giant monster, or is the gameplay suited to fight a human-sized man?
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah. So, okay, that brings up another thing. It's like, when... Okay, an example of this would be like Dead Rising. Most of the bosses are psychopaths, which are humans, but they have like a ridiculous amount of health, and you can just put like fucking everything into them, and it doesn't really do much.
Yeah.
And I don't like those fights. I don't like fights in games where like that's the thing. Where I mean, if it's a melee fight.
You're wailing on a dude with a chainsaw, and he's still just shrugging it off.
Yeah, and he's walking away.
He's a normal dude.
But then you can go outside and chop somebody in half, and it does, like, insane. Like, I hate that because it makes me feel like... It takes me out of the immersion a bit. Yeah. Like, I'd rather have some kind of explanation as to why they can resist these attacks.
Anthony, you have 20 health bars and you're using a lightsaber, and you find it weird. You find it weird that a dude on a motorcycle with chainsaws can take more than a shotgun blast.
Maybe Dead Rising is maybe not your best example.
Yeah, it's really not. It's taking me out of my immersion, and then just cut to footage of our Let's Play.
Do you remember my immersion and it just like it's just the final boss of Off the Record, just a giant freaking amusement park mech.
Oh, that fight has such good music though. Fucking sick dubstep. Oh, it's so good. So, I kind of want to go back to. I just remembered a couple things about final boss fight music, because I feel like that should be the, like, hey, this is the best song we have in the game. We're going to use it on this guy. Like, One Winged Angel from what, Final Fantasy VII?
Yes.
I love that movie. Sorry.
Then you have like the theme. What was his name? Gwen's theme from Dark Souls 1, which is just piano music.
Pling pling plong.
Pling pling plong. And then the sick ass dubstep where you're fighting the giant crab mech in Dead Rising 3 off the record. Dead Rising 2 off the record.
I can't think of any examples. And the only example I can think of is literally the only example I can think of is something like something directly pointing out the trope. But what is it? When I love when the final boss uses some sort of leitmotif that takes you back to older things. And my only example I can actually think of that is from Seth Everman's like video game music video where his final.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. This is why we have backups. Anyways, thankfully I didn't cut out anything we said, so I can still use this. Anyways, so how do you feel about like how do you feel about super bosses?
Define super bosses.
Okay, so Final Fantasy pretty much coined the term where it is a boss that takes place after the final fight of the story, and it has the most health and defense. Like, I think either it has an insane amount of like health and defense, and even at max level, you might have difficulty taking this thing down.
I don't. Mixed feelings on it.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
I feel like Final Fantasy kind of abuses it because you have there's a fucking Final Fantasy boss that takes 10 hours to beat. And there's a chance, so I think what's the one that has, what's his face in it? The racist guy that plays soccer.
Final Fantasy X.
Yeah, Final Fantasy X. So Final Fantasy X has a super boss, which has like fucking 40 health bars or something that you have to drain. And then it has a move that it will use on the final health bar, where it copies the status effects of one of your teammates, and if you use a full restore on that teammate, it full restores the boss. And this boss fight takes 10 hours to beat. Like, I'd put my fucking fist through a wall at that point.
I was like, I don't really like I don't like super bosses at all. Really, like I get that maybe there are people who like them. They like the ultimate challenge. They like getting everything ready to take on this sort of like ultimate challenge that's even greater than the final boss. But I just don't like them because they're just like, they're outside of the narrative. They're just unnecessarily difficult. Like, I don't know. Like I remember I did the super boss in Borderlands, the pre-sequel, and I was just like, this is dumb. The super boss of Borderlands, the pre-sequel, is literally just a harder version of us.
Yeah. Borderlands is kind of guilty about that, because their super bosses are just kind of lame.
I know you could cheese the one from Borderlands 2.
Yeah,
you could just stand at a certain point and they can't hit you.
And and I hate that because it's added such like a mundane. I don't know. I feel like if bosses don't have multiple phases, they shouldn't warrant that much of a health bar. Like if you can boil it down to dodge, hit, dodge, hit, like they don't change up any of the mechanics, I feel like it's a bad boss fight. because then it's just you mashing buttons for like 4.5 hours. Like, how long do you think a boss fight should last? Because in my opinion, a lot of boss fights are too short. Like, I really feel like they're never.
Like total?
Yeah, like one boss fight, how long roughly do you think it should last with all the phases, excluding exposition?
10?
I'd probably say about 10 minutes. I feel like that's a good time.
I feel like it depends on genre and difficulty. Like, I don't want to fight a really hard 20-minute boss battle, but if it's like a epic climbing super climatic but easy boss battle, then I don't mind it lasting a long time if it can be showy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say like 10, 15. Yeah, if it's like that, I think if it's broken up well.
I just because it's like super bosses ruin that for me, and I really hate that video games are like, oh yeah, we need to keep adding more. Like fucking Final Fantasy 14 has a ridiculous amount of super bosses.
I mean, yeah, they have an ultimate version of every boss in Final Fantasy 14.
It's so weird. I mean, that game gets a bit more of a pass because it's multiplayer, so like, I mean, even then, I take it back because I'm thinking of some examples now that I don't like.
I mean, like, if it's a DLC thing, then like, yeah, sure. If it's a DLC that purposely takes place after the narrative, and like thematically, they're not supposed to be stronger than the final boss. It's just like mechanics wise, they are because you have higher gear, especially if it's in a DLC that gives you better gear. After that point, then that I'm okay with. But like the super bosses that you're describing, I really don't like the sound of them.
They're not fun. I've never had fun fighting a super boss. And what sucks is usually the reward for beating them is like either a really good weapon or just nothing. Because it's like, you've beaten the hardest thing, what more do you need?
Yeah, that made me really upset, and I hate the fact that the super boss and one of my favorite RPGs ever, Super Mario RPG, they have a super boss that has like a fun kind of fun side quest where you have to like trade a bunch of items to eventually like get the thing to open this door, and then it's just this like really hard ultimate like fight, and you get nothing.
And
in fact, that's even worse because God knows how many items you've spent in that fight.
yeah, and it's like, well, what can you justify giving that? You know, okay, cool, he gave you an ultimate weapon, you've proven that you don't need it, or he gave you a bunch of reusable items. All right, you don't need them, you've beaten everything at this point, probably.
I would say that's probably one of the most disappointing things in some boss fights is the, hey, you've gotten this, like, more or less, I'll call it the easy mode weapon. It's like, especially in like open world games where like you can go back and just like kind of mess around with stuff in the world, quote unquote, but like there's not like the story left anymore. Just you mess around, hey, I have this ultimate item. Too bad I don't really have anything to fight it on. I guess I'll go hit these small goblins.
I think that the final boss needs to give you something, like that super boss, they need to give you something that is fun. Like, I don't know, unlocking some kind of deep, not like a debug mode, but like a cheat mode, or doing something that can change like a future gameplay. Like,
I mean, like New Game Plus would be the easiest thing for that.
yeah,
Like if a game had New Game Plus and you got something from that boss that you could take into New Game Plus, sure, yeah, that's good. But for the games that don't have anything like that, like it's just, all right, that's the end of the game, and that's it. Like you're just like, I think that's just like one of the biggest dick moves you can pull. Is like, hey, cool, you get an item from beating this final boss. Too bad there's not any game left. Hope you didn't do all those side missions leading up to this.
yeah. And it's like Dark Souls just in general does that, because Dark Souls is kind of known for having its new game plus mechanic stuff, and they do it fairly well. But the problem is that the fights, like the final fights, are never like the thing that you get from them is never really worth it. Aside from maybe like Dark Souls 3, because you get kind of a cool weapon, but like the fights never do much. Like you beat them, you get like a weapon, but it's like, all right, cool, but this other weapon that I got earlier is still better than that. So I don't know, add some weirdness to that. So then how do you feel about, like, I guess bosses that are just a big version of an enemy?
Yeah, that's like going back to the Batman game. Like that annoys me so much.
I mean, like Mario does that a lot, where it's like, oh, you gotta fight a big Goomba or a big Koopa. It's like,
I mean, I'll give some leeway. Like if it's thematic and it makes sense in anything other than like something like Batman, then yeah, I can see it. Like, oh, this is like, it's like, oh, it's King Bomb, or it's King something like this. Like it's just like the biggest possible thing of that. It's not the best, but I'll be okay with it.
I will say this fully realizing that I might get crucified. Mario 64 has some of the worst bosses in gaming history. They are the most boring, mundane bullshit boss fights that I could care less about. I couldn't care less about. Like, yeah, King Thwomp, it's easy. King Bob-omb, you just get behind him. Bowser's the same fight, but he has some more mechanics. But if you're fast enough to grab his tail, you don't even see them. Like, it might just be because that was like the first of like third-person platforming. It's like, obviously hasn't had a chance to evolve yet, but
it's a problem when the most unique boss battle in Mario 64 is the most forgettable one. That's the fucking like pyramid, the guy in the pyramid, like the freaking like hands.
Oh yeah. I always forget about that one.
There's also Wiggler. People forget about Wiggler. The Wiggler isn't really that good of a boss battle. You just jump on him and you win.
Yeah. So, I guess. So, what would be the perfect boss fight in your opinion? Because for me, it'd be like it'd have to have high stakes, set up early in the game, testament to your power.
Well, are we talking like final boss fight, or are we just talking like at any point boss fight?
Probably.
I think that makes a big determination on this.
That's a good point. Let's do final boss fight, and then we'll go back to just like what do you like in a regular boss fight. Flip that. We'll do regular boss fight, then final boss fight. That makes more sense.
I think I don't know. I don't think a fight has to be hard to be good. I think a fight can be easy if the story makes it matter. Like if the story like kind of climaxes in a way where it still makes you feel powerful, even though like it's super easy. My favorite example of like this is Asriel, the final boss of the pacifist route of Undertale, where like it is the most climactic fight in the whole game, but you can't lose it. It's literally impossible to lose the fight, but it is the greatest fight in that entire game.
Interesting. I didn't know that you can't lose that fight.
Yeah, if you die, it's just like your determination keeps you going or whatever. But it's such a good fight because like it's like you got all your friends helping you. You got this epic music, like it's like the only boss that has color and he's like flying around the screen.
Undertale has some really good boss fights in general because it mixes up mechanics for a lot of boss fights. Or just a lot of fights in general. Because all the fights are the same. It's just boss means that they have like a health bar, I guess. More of a health bar.
Oh, yeah. I just love every fight, like every boss battle in Undertale. Like, I mean, even the enemies do the same of just like each of them having their own kind of quirk with attacking.
And also like in Undertale when you attack like regular enemies too, they'll mix their attacks sometimes, where it's like this one guy has like the seahorse guy has like this one thing, and then like the frog has another thing, but then they mix them together and they're both hitting you at the same time. It's kind of cool. I have to agree. I like when the boss changes up the mechanics, but not necessarily to the point where it feels like a completely different game. And I also don't like when the boss runs away from you, because that is just a like. I don't like chasing somebody in a boss. I want them to face me.
Yeah, I don't like stage bosses where it's just the specific thing of them running away.
Yeah, I feel like a stage boss has probably been done well. I just don't know any. It's one of those problems. It's like if it's good, it might be forgettable, but if it's bad, then you're never going to forget it. You know.
Chase bosses, I think, are also probably one of the worst ones. Like when you are fighting a boss and they escape, but now it's an entire other mechanic of chasing them down for a while. It's not like, oh, he moved up to a rooftop. Let me get up there. It's, all right, he's flying at Mach speed across the city. Time to go follow him.
Like a kind of an okay version of like just a completely different mechanic change. In Sly 1, you fight this voodoo witch lady named Miss Ruby. Forgot her name for a second. And her entire boss fight is just a rhythm game. But you don't do that at any other point. And it just feels weird. Yeah. I don't like it. It's not a great boss fight, not very memorable. The level's good, but just And then I actually do kind of want to talk about the final fight against Clockwork, because that's a really good fight.
I don't like the first game's one, but the second game's one was really good.
Against Clockla, yeah.
Wow.
So
I knew it was right on something. The game Bastion. In the final like climax of the game, you either have the option, or like you have two options at the very end of the game. One of them leads to a boss fight. The other completely gets rid of the boss fight, and it's just the other ending, which is just you carrying someone important to the story through the rest of the game at the last bit of the game. But if you make the other choice, it's then you have to fight that person as the final boss.
it's kind of weird.
It makes sense for the story.
Okay.
Because I was thinking about it, I was like, does Bastion have a final boss? Like, I don't remember, and it's because I chose the other option all the time. But looking back, it's like, oh, yeah, there is a final boss. It's fighting him. But I mean, both endings are satisfying, but for very different reasons.
Yeah. The Silent Hill games have some interesting mechanics depending on which game you play. Because the final boss in, I want to say 2, depending on your choices throughout the game, the boss will look different and have different attacks just because of like little things that you did throughout the game. And like Silent Hill Shattered Memories does that with the enemies, but in particular 2, I believe, does it with the final boss fight. It's actually a really cool like change up. Because if you're more morally corrupt, I think the boss actually becomes harder. But if you like more focus on your family, I think it's slightly easier. It's still a difficult fight, but it's slightly easier. And then what?
I was gonna say, I think we actually got off your topic.
Yeah, it's fine. I just thought, how do you feel about items that are just used for boss fights? Like in games that let you equip items or use items or so on and so forth.
Items that you use specifically on that boss?
Yeah, like it either one hit kills it or does a ton of damage, or it's its weakness, or it's like it's required for this fight.
No.
If it's required, I don't feel as bad. But if it's like a one-hit KO thing, or if it's like it's the only way to hit it, like
If it, I mean, if it's like a secret thing, I think it's pretty fun, like interesting. Like like the Dark Souls like the Dark Souls thing we mentioned earlier. I like how in Final Fantasy X there's like a really like close to the end boss battle that you can instantly beat by just giving it a revive.
Oh yeah, I love that.
Yeah, because it's an undead monster, so if you give it a Phoenix down, it kills it instantly.
Resident Evil 4 has like a weird thing where you're fighting the final boss on like an oil rig, and then a character tosses you a rocket launcher. But you can get a rocket launcher earlier in the game at some point if you're really lucky. And if you use the rocket launcher you're not supposed to use as the final hit, it is permanently stuck in your inventory. And like you are not allowed to fire it at anything because you're like, oh, I got to use this on the final boss, and you're just like, well, fuck, it's already dead. So that might just be bad game design, but I still think it's annoying. I mean, it is bad game design, but
oh wait, I just remember one that I actually really like that fits your example really well about like something that you only use in the final boss in the game, a personal all-time favorite game of mine, one of the first video games I ever played as well, Ty the Tasmanian Tiger. That throughout the game you have like a rival Bandicoot who's like after you every once in a while, and then the final boss you fight like this giant like mech thing, and then the rival Bandicoot gives you his boomerang, and you have to use his boomerang, and his boomerang lets you control it in like a flight mode, and you have to fly it through the inside of the mech to hit the inside. And like you can't get that boomerang anywhere else in the game. Like that's the only time you can ever use that boomerang is during that boss. You know, as a kid, I wanted to use that boomerang outside of that boss battle. Luckily, I think 2 and 3 like recognize that fact and let you use that boomerang and like let you unlock that boomerang.
You kind of reminded me. I really love boss fights that are just straight up a result of you fucking up somewhere. And one of my favorite examples is in Sly 3, the second, I think it was the second one, yeah, where you go to Australia, and you're like trying to destroy this evil mask, and then like your rival / love interest shows up, and the mask just jumps on her, and you're like, oh no, she gets a bit bigger and then starts chasing around one of the characters. And so you have this part of the mission where you're shooting her from like a tower with like these sleep darts to try to knock her out. But then like the chemicals go bad with like the magic, and it just makes her even bigger. And so it's just like it just results in like you having to scale this giant woman while she's like throwing shit at people. And it's a really cool boss fight, but I love that it's just because you keep fucking up and you don't know what you're doing. It's so good.
I actually really love that about the Sly bosses. It's that the Sly bosses are usually like always like you mess up the last part of your plan, and then that's why you have to have a fight.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have that opera thing against the dog in the third game. Something goes wrong, and then next thing you're Murray fist fighting him in like an oil slick.
Oh, it's so good.
Or you're fighting the freaking like Tiger King dude in like a water pit. Like there's just always like something goes wrong with a fight in Sly, and it causes you to like do something.
I love the Baron fight because it's a dog fight at first that you have to gun him down in a regular size airplane, and then after you gun him down, then he calls in a giant like stealth bomber, and then you have a fist fight with him on the wing of the bomber while it's flying over the airfield. Like, it is such a cool fight, and it's It's quite long too. Like it can take up to like 15 to 20 minutes. But I feel like it's so well done because they changed the fight halfway through to a completely different style.
Yeah, Sly 3 does that a lot. Like they completely change it up. Like the Baron, there's like the pirate that you fight like on the mast of the ship, which is a really fun one. Where that's the only time they ever use that gameplay style.
Yeah,
It's like the only time it's just like you have a sword fight on a mast of the ship, like as playing as Penelope as herself, which is the only time that ever happened. my only exception to that I think is a really bad boss battle in that game is the final boss battle of China where you fight the dragon, because the dragon just has no build up and it just comes out of nowhere.
yeah, because like, oh yeah, you're gonna fight Emperor Tao, but no, then it's just like, haha, giant dragon.
Which is a shame because they actually gave him a really good boss battle, and that's the one where you're fighting like on top of the bamboo.
Yeah, and you can like change direction in midair, and like, oh, it's so fun.
Yeah. And then you both get knocked down to the ground below, and then he like summons like zombie hands out of the ground. That should have been the final boss of that level.
Should have. I feel like setting is a really important thing. Like boss fight arenas don't need to be big, and that's a perfect example of it. Where the boss fight arena is a confined area, but the mechanics of how you move through the area are so cool and like fun.
I did think of two things that kind of go hand in hand that I don't like about boss fights, and I think a lot of games, well, definitely one that a lot of games are going away from, but twofold. One, quick time events in a boss fight, and cinematic parts of the boss fight where, like, say like you beat the boss, but in story you get the final hit in a cutscene. It's not actually you doing anything.
I'll one up you there. I hate when you beat the boss and then the cutscene plays and he's totally fine, and then he beats you in the cutscene.
Ew, yeah.
I hate that.
The biggest, what would I even do this for then moment now.
I feel Devil May Cry does a really good job of the fans have called it cutscene Dante, where that is the, like, in the cutscene is the strongest the character could possibly be, but then in gameplay he can be severely like slower just because it's human reaction time and all that. And so like they have a task of the first Devil May Cry game where they play through it, and they just call it the cutscene Dante playthrough because he's constantly taunting. He has like frame perfect reaction time, and it's like that's how he is in the cutscene. So it's like all this dumb shit is canon in a way, and I love that. But I hate when they flip that around, where you're weaker in the cutscenes than you are in the actual gameplay.
I have to say that I do kind of prefer the final hit to be dealt in the cutscene, because if it's not, then it's usually, because if it's in the cutscene, then usually it's some like epic thing where he's holding his sword down to the side and then does like an upward slash, like runs at him, does upward slash, and it's something cool. But if it's like, if the final blow is dealt in the gameplay, then it's something like you poke him with the tip of your sword, and then it cuts to the cutscene. The guy's on his like knees with holding his arms like,
yeah, and
you
like,
bested me.
And I love when, like, in that certain, like, circumstance, you can hit them with, like, a really weak attack or, like, just accidentally hit them with something, and it's like, oh, that's the final hit.
Oh, no, my favorite is when they do, like you like, poke them, and then, like, it does the lead into the cutscene where it's like,
Oh, man, that's a really good, like... I also like when bosses show that they are hurt in some way. Like, in Dark Souls 1, where you fight the giant wolf, the wolf, like, towards the end of the fight, actually starts, like, limping towards you, and his attacks actually get slower. And it's like, for gameplay reasons, I understand why you don't do that, because it just makes the boss fight easier. But, like, in Dark Souls, you feel bad for killing this boss, and you're like, oh, it's a nice dog, I don't want to hurt it. And so, like, I really like when they do that, because I feel like the final hit is now justified. You know, Excuse me.
We can agree on no QTs, right?
I like QTs because it goes back to my thing of like I think a final boss battle can be easy if it climatically deserves it.
The only I can't say with QTs is a bad thing because like God of War has QTs and they're not bad. But then you have like Metal Gear Rising, which the final fight.
Was the one. Yeah, I was gonna bring up that one.
The final fight against the Senator is actually really good. And it's a very cinematic fight too.
I mean, I haven't played Metal Gear Rising, and I want to so bad. I love contextual music. Like nothing is more cool than the lyrics of Rules of Nature kicking in only when you start running up the arm of Metal Gear Ray.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. There's there's another game that does that where it adds more instruments the stronger the character gets, and then like halfway through the fight they start taking away instruments because you're like killing them.
Oh, I gotta know that Twilight Princess does that really good as well. Whenever you knock the boss into the sort of their damage phase, because like usually it's something where like the boss will be unhittable, you hit their weak point, and then it gets them down to like a point where you can slash them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the music changes to show you've got that moment essentially. Like it's like the dun 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 dun, dun, dun. Like the music like swells and climaxes when you can hit the boss.
I'm not a huge fan of bosses with just straight up weak points because without good story reason. Like Resident Evil 4 Nemesis, not Nemesis, the Menos Grande. Just these giant dudes, and then you knock them down, and they lean over, and then like this giant, like obvious hit point comes out of their back, and you got to go up and kill it. It's like I hate that. But then you have like Bayonetta, where it's like the angels are armor-clad monsters, more or less, and you have to knock the armor off to then do damage to like the underskin. And so it's if it's done correctly, I don't mind. I still don't like it, but it needs to be done right. A genre I do think does not have a great boss fight that I've played yet is side-scrolling beat 'em ups.
Yeah, that was my thought because just I was playing through like Streets of Rage 4, it was like it's like they have some interesting styles.
Like the dominatrix in the boat, she's an okay boss for that game because like she powers up other enemies and like that's kind of her fight. But then you have like the warden, like the police chief or whatever. Zero tells across stage attacks that you can't dodge. Like
you did not like him.
There's
always you too. I always avoid them. They always caught you. I'm just like, okay,
every single fucking time.
To the window, to the wall.
Yeah, those bosses are really bad. Like as much as I love Double Dragon Neon, in that game aren't that good because there's usually like something like they'll just keep switching sides of the field and then just range you the whole time. And by the time you've walked to their side, they just switch sides again. I was like, just let me hit you.
I was just thinking, like, that's another game that the final boss fight is just yourself. Oh, that's such a good fight.
I mean, that's a staple in the Double Dragon series. Is if you play co-op, you have to fight for the girl's affection.
I love
that. That's in like every Double Dragon game.
That needs to be done more in co-op games where the final fight is the guy that you're playing with.
I remember Funhouse played some like really obscure, weird game, and like that happened in it.
Pseudo relevancy. How was the boss fight in Scott Pilgrim versus the World? Like, how did those fare? Do you know? Because like cinematically they're cool. I just don't know how they handle.
I mean, every stage build up to the boss. Like,
I don't think they're bad. I never heard anything about them being bad.
Yeah, but I haven't heard anything about them being great either.
yeah, I mean, they're serviceable. Like, they're side scroller beat 'em up bosses.
Based off of a movie, yeah. Based off of a book.
Book, video game, then movie, I think.
Layout.
Ugh.
Wait, no, it's book. It was book, movie, video game.
So,
And the video game is more based on the book.
how do you feel about returning boss fights? Like, for example, Devil May Cry, the very final fight of like most of the games is you just fighting your brother. And like, canonically, you beat him every time, but then he comes back with a stronger sword, and he's like, "I am the thunder. I will come back." You know, it's like, shut up! I'm gonna kick your ass again. I like it, and if it's done right, and like the character feels stronger, I feel like it's good. But I hate when they bring back a character and they've completely changed, like they've ground up completely changed everything about him.
I mean, yeah, like I mean, I straight up pretty much already talked about it with Shantae. I know I said like the risky boots thing throughout seven sirens is like bad, but I'm not really sure how I narratively feel about fighting risky boots in any game because she's in every game. Like she's always a boss in every game, and I'm not. I mean, I guess I kind of like Burning Town, like the setup where the start of almost every Shantae game is Risky Boots attacking the town.
Yeah. Don't you team up with Risky at some point in one of the games?
Yeah, Pirate's Curse. The best one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like I said, I like the running gag of Octo Baron. Just like you pretty much end up fighting him in every game because he's just like but he doesn't really want to be a boss anymore. He's just like, I'm done with this boss stuff. Like he recognizes the fact that he's a shitty video game boss, and then he just like, and then like he doesn't want to be that, and then he always ends up being it in the end.
I feel bad for the bosses that like get back that like for a sequel get brought in as like a character, but then they just get flanderized and weaker. After that final boss fight they had in the previous game, and now they're just like, hey, I'm with you guys, but not as strong as it used to be.
Super obscure EA game, Alice Madness Returns, does that pretty badly. Which is a shame because that game's actually really good. But
I can't think of an example, but I'm pretty sure there was a video game I played at some point where one of the playable characters in the sequel is the boss from the previous game.
There's that meme, it's like, oh yeah, bosses when you fight them, and then bosses when you unlock them, and it's just like a complete like downgrade. And I get why, you know, you have to make the game pseudo-balanced regardless of what you're doing, but still. Because I think, like, again, I'm bringing up Marvel versus Capcom, the new one, you can unlock Thanos at some point, but Thanos is, like, severely downgraded when you actually play as him. It's just sad.
That's why I love the Galactus thing in 3, because, like, you can't take Galactus into any other mode. It's just, like, essentially playing as Galactus as its own, like, game. And then, like, the whole point is that you're just super overpowered.
How do you feel about, Master Hand and Crazy Hand from Smash Bros? I don't hate them, but I also don't like them that much. I feel like they were done kind of in a weird way.
I don't know. I like them sometimes. I kind of liked Smash 4. Like, what is it? The Mega... Whatever that weird, like, the actual final boss of Smash 4 was. Or, like, if you play on a certain difficulty, you fight, like, a completely different boss.
Oh, yeah. There's the, that's a great example. It was a Brawl, I think, when you fight the giant butterfly man. His final stage is just an orb that you beat the shit out of. Like that's a good, like, I guess cinematic way of like, okay, the final stage isn't strong, but you still need to like beat him up.
I liked four Master Hand and Crazy Hand because they had like team attacks. They had like an attack where they like high fived each, where they kind of like clapped their hands together.
Yeah.
Also, I love the fact that Master Hand and Crazy Hand are opposite hands.
Yeah.
So essentially, they like the person that the hands belong to. Like that's both of their hands.
I really liked Smash Ultimate's like. I really like the thing that where they let you play as Master Hand, because that was a really cool thing, because they haven't done that in any other game canonically. So you could do the thing where you plug it in the third slot and like one of the games.
Yeah, I think it was Melee, and that was a glitch.
Yeah. I love that though. It's so dumb, but I love it.
I can't think about that playing as Master Hand thing though without thinking about the terminal montage thing with Master Hand. I forget what he says when he does it as well, but he says something like really funny.
Oh, I love terminal montage. How do you feel about bosses that are just characters from another game? Like what you were saying with Mario RPG, where you just fight a character from Final Fantasy at some point. I feel like it's always funny. I've never seen one of those, and I'm just like, oh yeah, that's lame. I'm always like, this is just a funny boss.
They actually brought up something interesting, because in Kingdom Hearts 1, you go through a lot of those Hercules tournaments, and then it's just Cloud at the end.
Oh yeah, can you fight Sephiroth too?
Yeah.
I'd rather not talk about Sephiroth in Kingdom Hearts 2.
I mean, Sephiroth in both 1 and 2 is essentially like, yeah, he straight up is the ultimate boss in 1.
Yeah,
You know?
I hated fighting him in 2. I hated fighting him so much.
If you're playing on critical mode, then the first attack, if you don't counter it, he can kill you instantly.
Oh my god.
I thought of a like boss from a different game that I love so much. In Final Fantasy XIV, they have a crossover with Monster Hunter where you can fight the Rathalos. And I love that fight so much because of the way they mess with the mechanics of that fight.
What do they do to it?
Well, first, like the first phase is you're just fighting him kind of like a boss. He's got his like mechanics he mixes up and stuff. He's got some cool attacks where like he will a little bit like like prelude is that you learn that like Rathalos is kind of wrecking the local environment because he's like an invasive species essentially, and so like to avoid some of his attacks you actually have to use like the carcasses of like monsters of local wildlife. Like there's like these big elk things that you have to like get behind to dodge his fire blasts.
Huh.
And then there's a part in the fight that is so climatically cool where all of the local wildlife like bum rushes him and he's like distracted fighting all of these like local animals. Because like the local animals are trying to take back their territory from the Rathalos. But what's really interesting is there's a part where Rathalos scorches the field, and after he scorches the field, healers can't heal anymore. Instead, everybody has to use potions. Like they give you 10 Monster Hunter like potions, and you have to use that to heal for the rest of the fight.
Huh.
So it's like not only like it messes with the mechanics, but also like straight up makes you like play it as a Monster Hunter game.
That's kind of cool. I like that.
But yeah, like Final Fantasy XIV has like the best like crossovers and making you like feel like you're playing that game, like the Nier raids where you're like they become bullet hells.
Oh yeah. I love the Nier raid. I watched somebody play through it because I was just so curious. 'Cause I'm not anywhere close to that yet, so. But Nier raid's so good. Well, all right. Anything else we really want to say about boss fights?
I mean, do we have any specific ones that we want to like just kind of like give a mention of that we love?
That's a good one. Margaret Moonlight. She will be forever in my top 10 favorite boss fights of all time. The final boss from Dark Souls 3 is really cool because they took all of the weapons that you used, like they took the statistics of all of the weapons that were used to beat the final boss in the first game, and they used that to make the weapon set for the third boss, or the final boss in the third game. It's like, I love that. First boss in Lollipop Chainsaw. He's really good, and he's voiced by the lead singer of Mindless Self-Indulgence, which is one of my favorite bands. Yeah, how about you guys?
Going back to Final Fantasy 14, I love almost all of the bosses, like a lot of the bosses in that game, because a lot of them have like really cool set pieces and music. The one that I always go back to because it's like just narratively my favorite. I can't remember her name exactly. I think it's like something. She's like something to do with the moon, and she's such an interesting boss because she's essentially the one of the antagonists of the Stormblood DLC, who then becomes a primal, and then she has this part of her fight that I love so much where she like depowers, like she loses her powers, and you have to protect her from these shadows that represent like her. It's like the shadow of the patriarch and the matriarch, which are like her parents. You have her brother, the general, and then my favorite is like the general overpowers the entire party, and he's about to kill her, and she's just like, "Just do it," and then a shadow of the only person who actually believed in her shows up and like protects her. It's like I won't let you die. And then the whole time she's just like, "Why are you protecting me?" I was like, this is way too cool for an MMO boss battle. Like that makes me like tear up every time I see it, because like he's the only one who cared about her. He even gave her like a cute nickname. But like for like a shadow of him to protect her in these like moments.
I like that. How about you, Jarrett?
I don't have any that I can think of.
Got nothing on top of your head?
No.
Slight mention, we kind of just roughly talked on this, but the mini bosses, they're kind of weird because they're just it's a pit stop in like the greater scheme of things. And usually it's just an enemy that has a lot of health, and it's nothing really too important to touch on, but I just wanted to mention it real quick.
Yeah, I feel like mini bosses are even more acceptable to the becoming a mook thing, especially in roguelikes. I know Hades does it a lot. Like he's like, "Oh, two bomb guys." Like two bomb guys that jump around and throw bombs. They're mini boss. Hey, look, now they're mooks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, thank you for joining us. You can find links to everything that linked up, along with our Twitters and other social medias if you feel like following us. As always, we post twice a month, and we'll occasionally have a special episode, so be sure to stick around for that. Be sure to join us next time, and have a good day.
Bye, Internet.